Remind everyone to silence their electronic devices and call this meeting to order. Ms. Williams, may I get a roll call, please?
Yes. Ms. Stacy Cyberling.
Here.
Ms. Ellen Slobodnik.
Present.
Dr. Shantae Jones.
Here.
Mr. Paul Alexander.
Here.
Mr. Vice Chair, everyone is present except Mr. Kirkland will not be attending tonight.
Thank you. Ms. Jones, would you care to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Sure.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Right. Thank you. Okay. Are there any additions or corrections to the agenda?
None that I see.
All right. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda?
Motion to approve the agenda.
Second.
A motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Let's see. Ms. Williams, can I get do we have anyone signed up for public comments?
No, Mr. Vice Chair.
All right, so we can move past and go into new business, the fiscal year 2024 superintendent's proposed budget. Dr. Saunders.
Good evening, Vice Chair Alexander, members of the board. I'm here this evening to present the superintendent's FY24 proposed budget, my second budget as superintendent in Manassas Park, and it truly is a pleasure to be here and to continue to serve our community. Or not. Try that again. Okay, so with all that we do, our strategic goals for our division really drive the work that happens each and every day, preparing our students to be life ready, cultivating committed professionals that are invested in the achievement of our students, and providing effective and efficient support for student safety and success. All of these are elements that you will see within the proposed budget this evening. This year, I've shared with staff and with the community, I have had 4 areas of focus. This year, we talked a lot about excellence in progress, and our work each and every day works towards that excellence. We don't look at it as it's one moment in time. It really builds one thing upon each other. So we've looked at excellence in teaching and learning, excellence in compensation, excellence in service and organization, and excellence in strategic planning. Again, these 4 focus areas really set the foundation for the work within the superintendent's proposed budget. We have so much to be proud of in Manassas Park, and it's such a joy to celebrate our students and our staff each and every day. So many times in this very room, you have our superintendent spotlights and so many of the great accomplishments of our students. We're more than just full state accreditation, which we're proud of. We have students that really show all of their excellence and experiences in each and everything that they do. So it's great in a budget process just to remind ourselves how proud we are of the work that we do each and every day. As you know, in the Commonwealth of Virginia, the superintendent is charged with presenting a budget to the school board, a proposed budget. This budget is supposed to be a needs-based budget, and we have a timeline by which we have to present that. Tonight, I will be presenting to you a balanced budget that shows the highlights of our needs within the division, as well as some of the challenges and some of the unfunded priorities that we still maintain. So what were the budget priorities for the FY24 proposed budget? First and foremost is student achievement. Specifically in student achievement this year in this budget, looking at the area of literacy, academic intervention as we continue to grow past the pandemic, and aligning our curriculum to make sure that our resources are there for our teachers as they begin to teach both vertically and horizontally. Compensation continues to be a large part of what we need to do as a division to build a budget that really supports highly qualified teachers and retaining them and being competitive in the work that they do. We continue to look at sustainability and future planning because while we can create 1 year of salary increases, we want to make sure that we are able to create those year after year and be able to plan forward just as you do in your own budgets at home. And finally, while you won't see this reflected in my budget this evening, I do want to take a moment to thank the governing body and the city for its investment in the security and the safety in our schools. If you remember, in December, the governing body approved nearly a $5 million upgrade to our school security, our infrastructure, as well as some technology. We're excited to see that take place, to see some changes, and to continue to support the safety and security of our schools. We've also been very excited to have 3 school resource officers added to our buildings, and we appreciate that partnership with the city. So while, again, not necessarily reflected in my budget, it is important to understand that as a city we work together to create a safe and secure environment. Our budget development process is a 5-phase process. And it begins all the way back in October, November with some of the very people that are sitting in this room today. We ask our budget holders to really start talking about what are the needs, what drives the work that we need to do, what do they see as priorities, and start to have those conversations. Phase 1 moves on to Phase 2, which are our directors at the division level begin to hear from principals and those other budget holders and help to prioritize the next phase of the budget process. I like to say they spend a lot of time advocating for their needs, their wants, their buildings, their students, and at the end of the day, we all come together and agree upon some priorities within that. At Phase 3, I've asked the Phase 2 group, then presents to me as the superintendent a budget. I don't necessarily ask them to present a balanced budget at that point because they are really looking at the priorities that they see in their departments in their areas. Around the same time that they finish up their work in December, we typically receive calculation tools from the state, from the Commonwealth, from the Virginia Department of Education. The calculation tools give us an estimate of the revenue that we can expect for FY24. We also already know the revenue that we can expect from the governing body, at least in their projections, and so we begin to kind of come around a final budget. This year was a little bit different, and I want to share some of those challenges with you. If you've been looking in the news, if you've read anything out there in the media, you have probably come across the fact that the Virginia Department of Education had an error in their state budget calculation tools that were provided to school divisions across the Commonwealth. As I said, those are typically provided in December, and we build a budget based upon those projections. Now, we know not everything is guaranteed. However, those funds are typically something that we build the budget from, and we really move forward in Phase 2 and Phase 3. So in December, Mr. Lyon received those calculation tools, and he spends much of winter break trying to look at those and make sense of them. We moved through the process in January, and I can tell you that probably on about January 20th, we were completed with our budget process. I felt positive about the direction we were headed, and we were starting to prepare our presentations. On Wednesday, January 25th, I received an email from VAS, from the Virginia Association of School Superintendents, informing divisions of an error in the calculation in basic aid. On Friday, January 27th, we received a superintendent's email from VDOE detailing the correction to the basic aid estimates and a formula to make that correction. And then on Tuesday, February 1st, Mr. Lyon and I began to apply that formula and really know or understand what does that mean for Manassas Park. So you can see there in the red how this impacts us as a school division. Remember, we are not the only ones. You probably have seen that all school divisions across the Commonwealth have been impacted by this. For us, this error not only included FY24 projections, but it was also an error that was in the FY23 budget projections as well. So you can see for FY23, it is a total of $185,000, and for our FY24 budget projections, $455,000. So there is lots of conversation happening at the General Assembly level and at the legislative level to correct the error and to work through that. But as you can guess, as superintendent, I cannot assume that those dollars are going to be provided to us. So we had to redirect funds at the last minute in the budget process. So I share that with you so that you understand should things change. This will be a topic of conversation, I'm sure, throughout the budget process. But it's important to know how we are impacted directly. So I talked about compensation being a huge part of our budget process, and you know that last year I began the conversation around changing the compensation structure for the division. We put together a 4-phase process last year, talked a lot about this in the last year. We worked through phase 1 and were able to successfully create a teacher salary scale that was a traditional step schedule and implement that in this particular budget. This year, we were focused on the unified scale. The remainder of our employees are on the unified scale, both classified and managerial. And so we started the process of reviewing the unified scale and trying to plot that onto typical salary schedules where people would move in steps. We originally slated that phase 2 would simply look at support staff, but as we got into the process, we began to see that developing the entire scale was much more efficient and effective for us to do, and to be able to then look at what could we implement within the budget process. So I'm pleased to say that this budget does include a change in the support scale or the classified scale to a competitive step scale, as well as a managerial scale that is also a step scale. So those are, we're a little bit further ahead in phase 3, bringing that into this year. That will leave phase 3 for us to work on stipends and then to continue to work through the process. So what are some budget highlights in the FY24 superintendent's proposed budget? While this is not everything that's included in the budget, these are some things that I'd like to point out. We have included the revised classified pay scale and a revised managerial pay scale. It is an average of 8.2% increase. We have included a step plus 1% scale adjustment for teachers, which would be an average 4.4% increase. And I say that very specifically to say those are average increases, those are not by individual. So there may be variances across the board when specifically when we were looking at those classified and managerial scales, because people were placed in various ways. But those are the overall averages. We have included the health and medical sciences teacher, an additional teacher for that pathway to continue to expand year 2 staffing at Manassas Park High School. We have repurposed 5 FY23 unfilled positions. I very clearly say unfilled positions. These are not positions that people are currently in. So these are ones that have been vacant. To take on some things that we felt were new priorities for us and to really try to address some of the items that came forward from those budget holders. So included in this budget are 2 reading intervention assistants at Manassas Park Middle School, a special education transition services teacher at Manassas Park High School, a student assistance support specialist at Manassas Park Elementary School, and a contract adjustment for the pre-K supervisor to assistant principal at Cougar Elementary School. Again, these are not new FTEs. They don't actually increase our bottom line of FTEs. These are repurposed of vacancies that we had in other positions that we defined to be unfilled. We've included some minimal professional development allocations at the school levels. This is to allow our building principals to really target professional learning at their schools and what they need at their different levels. We have made a contract adjustment to our division specialist to 12 months, and that's really to address those curriculum alignment needs that we spoke of, to ensure that teachers have the resources and the curriculums they need to be successful both vertically and horizontally. And finally, we have included a small amount for recruitment and relocation bonuses to attract the best and brightest here to Manassas Park. As with any budget, and your wallets at home, I'm sure as well, there are unfunded priorities. These were items that I was not able to put into the budget. However, they are important enough to identify in priority order for us to consider if there are additional funds that become available, or for us to consider as we begin to build the FY25 budget next year. They are a starting point for us, as we know these are some priorities. The three things that are listed here, the first is an additional 1% adjustment to the teacher scale to help us remain competitive in our local area. The second one is a contract with Evidence-Based Classroom Solutions, EBCS, and the board has heard us speak about this contract in previous board meetings. This is a contracted service. It is not required for us. We do not receive any funds to do this. This year, we have included EBCS, the $355,000 in our ESSER funds. So we've been utilizing ESSER funds to pay for this. But you will hear ESSER funds are coming to an end. And so these are the things that will have to be moved into local funds where we will be locally funding these things. The Evidence-Based Classroom Solution provides a great resource and support for our staff and for our students as we continue to grow and learn with our kids as they come out of the pandemic. However, this was not included in the FY24 proposed budget. And the third thing is an additional pre-K classroom and teacher and assistant. Pre-K is a passion of mine, and I believe that if we have strong pre-K programs, then that helps our students as they grow into the high school students that we see each and every day. That early intervention is incredibly important. Pre-K is unique in the Commonwealth. It is not required in the K-12 funding. So we do have additional funding that we receive for pre-K program. However, that funding has local match to it. And so in the idea of priorities, it was important to know that we are serving many students in our pre-K program. More would be better, but this was an area that I reduced and would like to consider if there were additional funds. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Lyon, the Executive Director of Finance, to go through the budget detail and share some more very specific information about the budget with you tonight.
Thank you, Dr. Saunders. Vice Chair Alexander, members of the board, good evening. Before I move on to my next slides, I would like to take this moment and express my gratitude and appreciation to the principals, their assistant principals, their budget holders, my team members, their team members, for all the heartfelt discussions and collaboration we had. Without the honest professional relationships we have, this process wouldn't work. And because it requires a lot of discussion and a lot of compromise. We tried to do as much as we could to satisfy every request, but naturally you can't in a budget process. But we have begun to identify things, so as we go on to future years, we can always look back to last year and see what weren't we able to do, what things were we not able to get into, are they still a priority, and carry those things forward. So thank you. Appreciate everyone's participation. Looking at our enrollment, this is nothing new. Our enrollment continues to decline slightly each year right now, and rolling the numbers forward and looking outward, it continues to follow that same trend. The economic disadvantage and the English learner percentage in our memberships is still at their same levels and consistent, 55% respectively and 48%. Our membership of students with disability did tick up a little bit this year, and that may continue to go forward. Looking at our per pupil costs, through year 2022, those are final actual costs. 2023 and 2024 are projections based upon our budget estimates. So they're not actual expenditures. They will change. As you look at these, you'll notice our local per pupil allocation, our spending for 2024 does tick up a little bit in my projection. But when you look at the total per pupil over the years, we had pandemic funds over 2021, 2022, and through the end of next year. So those funds are starting to dwindle away. The ESSER 2 money has to be spent by September of this year, and ESSER 3 has to be spent by the end of September next year. So you'll start to see some of these per pupil amounts come back to ranges that they have been in the past. In this budget, we have 504 FTEs compared to the 511 that we presented last year. We still plan to keep K-3 class size at 22-1, grade 4 and 5 at 26-1, and middle school and high school average around 26-1, which is the same, well, the high school is the same as last year. As Dr. Saunders mentioned, the work on pay scales, one thing, one of the preliminary steps we had to complete is really to look at our competitors and analyze our hourly positions against their hourly positions. And not everything was apples and oranges, but we did the best we could. Our hourly employees, our classified employees, overall, they were mostly competitive, but there were a few that were under market, as we have put an example on this slide here. Managerial speaking, the 12-month administrative positions were opposite. Most of them were under market, but that's not. That's not normal. That's normal because managerial pay scales typically are usually the last ones to look at for raises. You want to take care of the teachers first and then the support employees. So there's an example of a few there. So the new pay scales we created, one was a classified pay scale, which hourly employees were placed on, and these are our non-exempt employees. So they are able to earn overtime in their jobs. The managerial pay scale are for 12-month exempt employees, and there are some examples there on the slide. To give you an example of some changes that we're proposing in these scales, a school nutrition starting hourly rate this year is $14.08. On the new proposed scale, that starting wage would be $15.97, a 13% increase. Bus aid, same thing, and the parent liaison with 11% increase. So I've been asked, Gabe, how were employees put on the new scales? How do you transition from the unified to these two different scales? The approach was similar with each scale. I took an employee hourly rate or a salary and then identified a step on the scale for the initial placement. Where different to the classified scale was I took that hourly rate that the classified employee has today and added 3% before we ever placed them on the new scale. So all classified employees have a minimum raise of 3% before they're placed on the new scale. So once I increased their current hourly rate by 3%, I found the step within their grade on the new scale and placed them there. Then I took a look at their years. If they had more years that I could place them on steps further down the scale that would benefit them, then I did. Now, if their years were steps below that placement, I didn't move them. I kept them on that step so that would benefit them. On the managerial scale, the difference was there was no minimum increase. I took their current salary, placed them within the grade that they're on the new scale, and then put them on the step that they benefited, the first step that they would benefit from, and then that's where they landed. The average raise for all employees on these new scales and the teachers was 6.9% overall for all employees. Here is the screenshot of the proposed classified scale for our hourly employees. It has 11 grades, 1 through 11. At the top, you will see the different positions for each assigned to each grade. Each grade has 30 steps. This is the managerial scale. This has grades 12 through 21. And as you'll see some changes or differences here, and that is grades 13 through 21 that have steps decreasing as you go up the scales. And that's to be competitive with our neighbors. That's how they do it too, and it makes sense. Here are screenshots of the proposed teacher scales. These scales have a COLA applied to them over last year and the same number of steps. However, I did make a design difference in these steps, or these scales. Last year, when teachers were initially placed on them, they would have to take their total completed years of service, subtract 1, and that was the step they would be on. Starting this year with these steps, they no longer have to do that. So if we were to hire a teacher today, 0 to 1 experience will be step 1, 2 years experience, step 2, 3 years experience, step 3, and so on. And these are just screenshots of the different contractual lengths of the instructional contracts on those instructional scales. The FY24 budget revenue, 65% comes from the Commonwealth, about 27% from the city, 7.4% from federal, and less than 1% from local sources. Expenditures by fund, we have 5 funds. 86% of our expenditures come from the general fund. That's our big one. Then after that, we have 6% capital, 5% nutrition, 3% federal, less than 1% for the medical trust. When we look at expenditures by function, 74%, or almost really 75% of our expenditures are for classroom instruction needs. The other areas fall into administration, attendance, and health, and then 5% for transportation, technology, and food services, and less than 1% for facilities. Expenditures by object. 77% of all expenditures are for personnel, salaries and benefits. After that, purchase services, material supplies, capital outlay, and other charges. So looking at our funds, our general fund, which again consists of 86% of our expenditures, on our proposed budget, we're proposing a $47.9 million general fund piece of the budget. The big differences you'll see there, revenue compared to our adjusted budget for FY23, it's about $900,000 more. Our salary costs in our proposed budget will be at $1.1 million more. The benefits will be $600,000 more. Then you'll see some decreases in contract services, materials, and supplies. We had to prioritize some things to balance this budget. But materials and supplies, we also moved some things into our capital improvement plan that for the past practices, for the past few years, all the capital expenditures were in our general fund. But we're moving them into our capital improvement fund now to separate them. So some of those costs came out of material supplies in our CIP plan now. Federal fund, you'll see a huge decrease here. As I mentioned earlier, our ESSER grants are coming to an end, and so you see about a $2.5 million decrease in spending here. And you'll see a big decrease there in materials and supplies, $1.7 million. Our school nutrition fund, $2.6 million in expenditures, which exceeds their total revenue, and that's by design. Mr. Taylor knows his expenditures are over his revenue. However, he has a fund balance he needs to spend down. He's been requested to do that by the state, so that's intentional to start spending his fund balance down. Capital project, this is our capital projects fund, 208. Here, we project a $3.1 million total expenditures. Looking at revenue for this fund, the state has given us a school construction grant of $1.9 million this current year. I plan to carry over $1.5 million of that grant into next year, FY24. So you see that there to offset some of that $3 million, and we're asking the governing body to fund our capital improvement plan at $1.6 million. Our medical trust fund. This is our fund for our retirees that we receive a subsidy for their medical premiums if they choose to use our medical insurance, and then they're responsible to pay the difference. However, I believe years ago there was a regulation that offered a benefit to them if they retired that we would cover that difference for them, and that's where you see the difference at the bottom is about $18,000 difference between expenditures and revenue. For now, to balance the budget, I'm leaving it there as drawing down the fund balance, but likely at the end of the year of this fiscal year, or end of next fiscal year, I would use end-of-year budget funds to take care of that shortfall. All fund summary. So all the funds wrapped together, the total proposed budget tonight is $56 million and $56,033,075, which is $1 million less than what we proposed in our adjusted budget for FY23. Again, a lot of those federal grants are coming to an end. Down at the bottom, you see the expenditures exceed our revenue for all funds. I refer you back to because of the food services proposed budget and the medical trust. That's why that $483,000 is there. And the fund balance at the bottom are those two fund balances summed together from the food services and the medical trust fund. So we take a look at 5 years out. We try to forecast what this looks like for expenditures and revenue. Before I show that real quick, I do want to go over some assumptions on this 5-year forecast. So in this forecast I'm about to go over, employees receive a 2% COLA every other year. So next year would be a step, then FY26 would be a COLA and a step, FY27 be a step, FY28 COLA and step. All employees receive a step each year. In FY26 and 28, a 2% increase was applied to the scale in addition to the step. In this projection, we keep the non-personnel costs flat. State funding for FY24 reflect VDOE projections. FY25 and 26 are projections of my own based upon a 2% increase from the current FY23-24 biennium budget projection. In FY27, the projected amount is decreased by 1.7% due to possible local composite index revision, which will be a natural result of the economic development being done here in Manassas Park. As the park does better economically, the state expects local dollars to cover more expenditures of the school system. So I'm just planning for that in this projection. And then federal funding in this model is increased 2% each year. So if you take a look at that, it's broken out by fund. First is our federal fund. So as we look forward over the next 5 years, if the grants grow by 2%, our expenditures will outpace that because of our salary. There will be a shortfall each year, so we'll have to plan on covering that with local dollars, those differences. The general fund, looking forward again, with adding no positions, just keeping level staffing, and making our step and COLA model going forward, we would look at having a shortfall in 2 years. Now that's with non-personnel costs staying flat, which they may go up. But that's why in the next slide we'll talk about the line item that we've established with the governing body. Food services is starting to show a shortfall in the out years too. And talking with Mr. Taylor, one thing we'll have to discuss probably next year when we start developing the budget is discuss how we want to handle food lunches. Right now they're free to the students. They don't have to pay for them. As the federal money starts to decrease, school boards will have to start deciding whether or not to cover these shortfalls with local dollars or start charging for lunches again. And there's pros and cons either way. And we'll get into that discussion next year, but just kind of putting that on your radar. The capital improvement fund going forward, looking in out years, I showed as a perfect model. The revenue will be there, everything will be fine, it won't have any shortfalls. I hope that works out that way. Those amounts up top are the amounts we will be requesting in those years from the governing body to support those capital improvement projects. Medical trust fund, same thing as we go out in the out years. And so, again, for FY24, the total expenditures of the budget we're proposing is $56,033,076. It's a rounding here there. I think I may have said 75 on the other page. All right, let me get back to the PowerPoint. Oh, and I did include in the attachment kind of a financial statement. It's a little more black and white of the budget being proposed if you want to look at that. So when you reflect on the 5-year plan, we look at some of the work we were able to accomplish with the governing body last year, and so I want to revisit that. We were able to reach an understanding with the governing body to establish a line item within their budget that would provide sustainability for our salaries for positions going forward and help prepare for that potential change in the local composite index. This line item, we would deposit unobligated revenue if we have any from the approved budget at the beginning of the year, and then any unexpended funds at the end of the year deposit into that line item. That line item would continue to grow at an amount equal to 5% of the average total expenditures over the last 5 consecutive years. And once that stabilization fund reaches that cap, any unobligated or unexpended funds would be returned to the governing body's own budget. And with that, I'd like to return the presentation to Dr. Saunders.
Thank you, Dave. So the next steps, where do we go from here? Well, obviously tonight is the superintendent's proposed budget. One of the things that we learned through the change in the teacher scale last year was that staff, it's kind of confusing. How do you get on the step? Where are you? What does it mean to you? And so last year we sent out projected projected salary letters to all of the teachers. We intend in the next few weeks to do the same thing for all staff, classified, managerial, and teachers, so that they can really understand these changes and what they mean to them. So that's the next step in our process. We will continue to hold conversations and allow people to ask questions. In that process, we will also identify the appeal process. So if someone gets something that they think is incorrect, just as we did with the teachers last year, they will have an opportunity to go through a process to identify how they believe we could rectify that situation. February 27th is the FY24 budget public hearing, and we will provide the school board any budget updates at that point, specifically anything that might come from the state or from VDOE, any changes that are happening as this is crossover weekend and there's some potential financial changes coming. March 13th, we would expect that the school board adopts the FY24 budget, and then March 21st, the school board will present their approved FY24 budget to the governing body. The governing body will then move forward in that process. As the school board begins to look at and think about the superintendent's proposed budget, we will provide you with a Google Doc, a link to a Google Doc where all board members can submit questions and we will provide answers. I believe we did this last year as well, and then we provide a summary of those questions and answers at that budget update. So Mr. Lyon will send that link to board members in the next day or so, so you can drop in your questions. You can see each other's questions so that we are not redundant in some of those questions, and we will provide those answers and then make those public through our conversations in the budget work session or in the budget conversations moving forward. With that, this concludes the superintendent's FY24 proposed budget. I thank you for your time this evening. I thank everyone for their work and their dedication, and look forward to our further conversations regarding the budget. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Do we have any comments or questions from the board?
I do. On the scale, you went through it and you were very clear about being able to see how many years experience and where you are on the scale, but yet underneath each scale it specifically says that the steps do not equate to years of experience. So it seems a little contradictory to have the footnote but yet emphasize that it is equal to years of experience. So can you just explain? I'm sure there's a story behind that. If you can just explain that.
Yeah, so they don't always have to equal the years of experience. I've been in education 30 plus years, and in multiple circumstances, because of the economy, scales have been frozen, so steps were not given. So then your years are not necessarily equal to those years unless your division or your organization provides catch-up opportunities. So it's a caveat. It gives us the opportunity to say that in this process right now, we're looking at years of service. That doesn't mean that in the future it always has to be that way. There might be a different board, a different recommendation forward. So I think, proposed salary schedules are always proposed and are subject to whatever funds are available there. So just making that caveat clear.
So I would just recommend that if we're going to send the message that it's a nice clear scale, that the years of service equal, that maybe we change the message just a little bit so it matches up with what you just said. Just a recommendation. The other thing was you said teachers are getting 4.4% increase. That was what was in there. Have we compared to what other local jurisdictions are doing and how we compare, just to make sure that we're not losing ground, or at least a lot of ground anyways, with our scales?
So my conversations with the region, so I sit in many region conversations, are anywhere between 4, 5, 7%. It just depends. Not everyone has presented their budget. Not all superintendents have presented at this time. I know that in our local area where we have compared ourselves before, Prince William County has presented their budget, and they are at a 5% increase for all staff. Whether that means there are variances in different tables, I don't know. Manassas City has yet to present.
Okay. One last question, and then I'm sure you probably have lots of questions. Can you go back to the last slide as far as like the timeline, as far as letting everyone know? And I think you just need to clarify, because I'm maybe a little dense here. But why would we send letters to staff about their proposed salary when we haven't voted on it?
Just as a projection, certainly salary, what we learned is that staff is trying to figure out where do they fit, and they're making decisions. They know that the board has not approved anything yet, and actually they know when I have the conversations with them, I've met with most staffs already, that nothing is final until really June 30th when the state approves its budget at 11:58, and so for us to use on July 1st. So it's always pending approval, but it gives people an idea of where we stand and what they can expect as they begin to make decisions.
When do the contracts start to go out for next year?
Contracts, I believe, have gone out in May. In May, thank you, Ms. Halstead. Typically in May, they have to be returned by, we have a June 15th date that is our binding date, so people have to decide by June 15th. And at that point, they're considered under contract with the current organization.
I'm done, thank you.
Go ahead, Paul. No, go ahead.
So I just had two questions. One, so I think it's the 9th, the governor submits his budget to, will we know, is it going to be June 30th when we find out if there's if they introduce anything to catch the error from the general aid miscalculation, or is it going to basically, do we know if we're going to get any money back from that, or is it a no harm?
So, I would be hopeful in projecting that there would be a correction. I can tell you what the information that we've received in the current crossover conversations have only been identifying resolutions to the FY23 error and no indication of anything in FY24. Now, again, how that works through a political process,
Right.
I don't know.
And this is just Mr. Lyon mentioned, when you're talking about paying down, the state had requested we pay down the fund balance in nutrition. I know, and I just want to make sure it's still the case, that the capital expenses cannot come out of nutrition, even like coolers and ovens. So I'm just curious, how do we pay down the nutrition fund balance?
I'm going to let you answer that one.
Mr. Taylor submitted a plan to spend down, and they included those capital projects, and they approved it.
Okay.
So I think we're okay.
Okay.
I had a question about the enrollment projections. I think they're fascinating. And then how will that be reflected in the future budgets? I know you kind of gave us the 5-year plan and in your projections. So I was just curious how you used that projection to help steer your forecast.
That projection is just for informational purposes. When we developed the budget, we use our ADM from the state, but it definitely, puts things on the radar that it will be hard to grow positions if our student membership is declining.
Great.
I have a follow-on to that one. Because I wasn't going to ask, but since you brought up that slide, when you're determining division enrollment, obviously we peaked at that 2019, 2018, but do we have an established, this is where we're capped out at, this is what we're designed to hold number, or is it just kind of
Our building capacity?
Yes.
I do not have the building capacity total off the top of my head. We can get that information for you.
Yeah, I mean, it's no, I was just curious.
Yeah, we can get that information for you. I'm not sure what our core qualified capacity is for all the buildings, but it's definitely probably more than what we have. But
I just know that sometimes, when you're on these downward trends, people are like, oh, you must have room. But if you were really, really over capacity, and now you're still just kind of over capacity, it's still over capacity. So
right,
just kind
exactly.
of.
Yeah, I'll get that answer for you.
I would think the fire marshal wouldn't allow for over capacity if the building couldn't handle the number.
No, but then at that point, we have the trailers and, modular classrooms and stuff. So, I was just curious.
And I would just indicate, we don't have an enrollment cap regardless of capacity.
Right, understood.
So
But,
if
you can't really cap it anyway.
Correct.
I was just curious what we're designed
Yeah.
to hold before we would have to, I mean, other districts would build another school.
Correct. We're going to have a hard time doing that.
Yes.
Well, you know, I don't know.
Anyway. All right, so we have any more questions? All right. Thank you, Dr. Saunders.
Thank you, and please look for Mr. Lyon to send you that link, and then as you look through the documents, if you have further questions, please feel free to link those in there, and we'll be happy to get those answers to you. Thank you so much.
Just one last, you are working with the city collaboratively. I know we did that last year, so that trend is continuing. Okay.
Oh,
That's
absolutely.
what I thought. Thank you.
All right, so upcoming meetings. We have a regular school board meeting and a public hearing on the 2024 superintendent proposed budget on Monday, the 27th, 6:59, right here in Chambers Room, second floor. And on March 13th, we have a board work session on the third floor in the school board conference room. Are there any school board member comments?
I just had another question. I apologize. I'm glad that we're having the public hearing on the 27th. Does the community have any other opportunities to share their opinion besides the public hearing? Sorry, I am new, so. Just curious.
Oh, good. Then I can ask a question after that one, too.
Sorry.
So the public hearing is generally the opportunity for the community's public input on the proposed budget. That doesn't mean that, community members can't reach out to board members and share information, as well as to staff members as well.
If the Virginia funding changes, are we going to apply it according to those three other objectives you were looking at in the budget?
I think those are the three things that we would have discussions about, and really look at what is the amount of funding, right? These are projections, and so I wouldn't say necessarily that any one thing would be done or not done. I think it's where the conversation starts.
I wasn't sure. You had said that they were in order of importance.
I have prioritized them in my judgment and made a priority order there. However, I think, we would have to see what are the funds. There are also processes happening within the General Assembly which might require us to do other things. For example, there's a lot of discussion about adding reading specialists to the middle school. So there are other costs that could come our way that we may have to consume those funds if they are allotted to those responsibilities as well. So priorities are there to help us guide our decision based on the funds that are available.
Yeah, I supported the number one. I thought making sure our teachers are compensated competitively, especially with our surrounding jurisdictions. I mean, they do a lot, so.
Agreed.
All right. Any other comments or questions?
Sorry.
Okay, I do have one. At the middle school, February 16th, there from 6 to 8 p.m., there will be a lasagna dinner where they will be discussing substance abuse and the opioid crisis in America right now. So please attend. There should be announcements, I think, on the school's social media page as well. But again, that's the February 16th from 6 to 8 in the middle school.
Who's hosting that?
The school?
The division.
Yeah, the
Okay.
division is. Yep. All right. And if there's no other questions or comments, I will call the meeting adjourned.